Hi, it's Patrick Hutzel from IntensiveCareHotline.com, where we instantly improve the lives for families of critically ill patients in intensive care, so that you can have peace of mind, real power, real control, and so that you can influence decision making fast, even if you're not a doctor or a nurse in intensive care. This is another episode of Your Questions Answered, and in last week's episode I answered another question from one of our readers, and the question last week was: my partner is in intensive care after he fell down a cliff with his truck. He has a brain bleed and is not waking up. How severe is his brain damage? You can check out the answer to last week's question by clicking on the link below this video. In this week's episode of Your Questions Answered, I want to answer another question from one of our readers. And the question this week is: my husband of 24 years was in intensive care after cardiac arrest and he died. It was horrible, and I think he could have been saved with a more positive intensive care team. Teresa writes: Hi Patrick. From your experience, how long can anoxic coma last for a patient that had a cardiac arrest requiring kidney dialysis from low blood pressure, low potassium, and also had diabetic coma as well as coronary heart bypass back in 2005? My husband also suffered from a cardiac arrest, respiratory failure with kidney dialysis, was in an anoxic coma for 2 weeks, eyes open at 3 days, moved his legs, arms and head, made kissing motion, sucking on tubes, blood pressure and breathing rate went up when I talked to him. I held his hand. He sometimes held mine back and pressed with his fingers onto my hand. He cried tears when I talked about our love and our 5 kids. He had to continue to do almost daily kidney dialysis, which would bring his blood pressures down, and had to be put on pressure medication to treat his low blood pressure. He opened his eyes by day 3. He turned his head and looked towards me, tried to speak, but had a tracheostomy in his throat. Unfortunately, the intensive care team was very negative from the start, and they kept pushing for withdrawal of care, of which I refused and said I wanted full care, and I demanded a transfer to the best hospital, best rehabilitation, and that I would always stand by my husband of 24 years. We were so in love. Well, my adult stepdaughter gave permission for removal of life support behind my back, and he passed away. I'm devastated because I know he could have survived with my help and love, and with better care from a more caring ICU. About how long can it take to wake from an anoxic coma? He had the hypothermic cool down for his cardiac arrest. He was on kidney dialysis, and he was a coronary heart patient. I loved him so much. He was my world. Please email me with answers. Thanks. Hi Sue. I'm very sorry to hear what you and your husband went through while he was in intensive care. I believe there's barely anything else in life that can be more traumatizing than losing a loved one in such dire and traumatic circumstances, where most families feel like they have no peace of mind, no control, no power, and no influence. From what you are describing, It sounds like your husband was very sick after he had a cardiac arrest, coronary artery bypass grafts, respiratory failure, kidney dialysis, and was in an anoxic coma. I can empathize with you that you felt the intensive care team was very negative, and surely it's something that I have seen over and over again, that intensive care teams are overtly negative when it comes to perceived end-of-life situations. They do this for a number of reasons, including, but not limited to, their financial interests, their bed management strategies, their medical research interests, their perceptions about you, your family, and your critically ill loved one. For example, powerful versus not so powerful. So, to continue there, Sue, it's very sad to hear that the intensive care team was very negative, and you obviously didn't feel supported through this traumatic experience, especially since you loved your husband very much. As it relates to the anoxic coma that your husband was in, I assume that he must have sustained some sort of brain damage from the cardiac arrest that might have led to hypoxia in the brain. In any case, given that your husband responded to you with holding hands, opening eyes, etc., I am surprised that the intensive care team didn't take those signs as positive signs. In any case, waking up after an induced coma and after an anoxic coma can take time, and often waking up is not linear, and waking up is more like switching on a light with a dimmer as opposed to a light switch. This often takes time, and maybe the intensive care team wasn't prepared to give your husband a fair go. They must have done CT scans of his brain, or at least performed EEGs, in order to determine the function or damage of his brain. However, especially with brain injuries or brain damage, intensive care teams can be very quick in wanting to withdraw treatment or limit life support, as they are simply not prepared to put in the time, the effort, the resources, financial as well as emotional, and it seems to be a lot easier to focus on the next admissions that are already waiting for precious, scarce, expensive, and in-demand intensive care beds. It's often a lot easier for the intensive care team to quote-unquote sell a withdrawal of treatment or a limitation of life support as being quote-unquote in the best interest of a critically ill patient, rather than focusing on best care and best treatment. I can very much relate to your disappointment, as I have seen similar situations over and over again. By all accounts, it sounds like your husband was very sick. However, as long as there is life, there is hope, and one should never assume that just because someone is very sick, that they can't survive critical illness in intensive care. And just because a critically ill patient has some sort of brain damage and doesn't mean that they can't survive or recover. It certainly can be more challenging after cardiac arrest. However, it's certainly doable, and I have seen this over and over again in intensive care. It would have been good, Sue, if you had contacted me at the time when it happened, and we certainly could have guided you and pointed you in the right direction so that you could have had peace of mind, control, power, and influence. At the very least, you could have had an end-of-life situation on your terms and not on the intensive care team's terms. At the best, we could have helped you to get a better outcome, and we could have helped you to turn the tables in your favor, irrespective of the outcome. I could have helped you to get more bargaining power for what you wanted. It's a big issue that intensive care teams always believe that they know what's best, or that they know what's quote unquote in the best interest of a critically ill patient. The truth of the matter is that whenever the intensive care team hints towards the best interest of a critically ill patient in intensive care, they are talking about their own best interest first, such as their financial interests, their bed management strategies, and their medical research interests. There are also some very distinct questions you should have asked whenever intensive care teams are talking about withdrawal of treatment, withdrawal of life support, or futility of treatment. Also, families of critically ill patients in intensive care often lack the awareness on how behavior of intensive care teams can be ingrained and inherently negative. Families of critically ill patients in intensive care tend to be so far outside of their comfort zone that they simply don't know how to interpret the behavior of intensive care teams. And sometimes there are clear signs that a critically ill patient isn't recovering, and sometimes withdrawing or removing treatment may be the right thing to do. It's difficult to say in retrospect, and hindsight is always a good thing. It sounds to me like you are seeking closure of this very traumatic period in your life, and it sounds like you are still grieving. And that's perfectly fine. Take as much time as you need and use the resources that are at your disposal. If I can help you on this journey, I will. I hope this helps Sue. So that was a very detailed email from Sue, and I hope that Sue has dealt with this traumatic experience and she can move on. She's not the first one writing to me with a traumatic experience where a loved one has been dying, and it's always sad to hear that families feel that the intensive care team could have done a lot better. So, how can you get peace of mind, control, power and influence quickly when your loved one is critically ill in intensive care? You get to that all-important feeling, peace of mind, control, power and influence when you download your free Instant Impact Report now by entering your email below. In your free Instant Impact Report, you learn quickly how to get peace of mind, real power and real control, and how you can influence decision making fast whilst your loved one is critically ill in intensive care. Your free Instant Impact Report gives you in-depth insight that you must know whilst your loved one is critically ill or is even dying in intensive care. Sign up and download your free Instant Impact Report now by entering your email below. In your free Instant Impact Report, you learn how to speak the secret intensive care language so that the doctors and the nurses know straight away that you are an insider and that you know and understand what's really happening in intensive care. In your free report, you will also discover how to ask the doctors and the nurses the right questions. Discover the many competing interests in intensive care and how your critically ill loved one's treatment may depend on those competing interests. How to eliminate fear, frustration, stress, struggle and vulnerability even if your loved one is dying. 5 mind-blowing tips and strategies helping you to get on the right path to peace of mind, control, power and influence in your situation. You'll get real-world examples that you can easily adapt to your and your critically ill loved one's situation. How to stop being intimidated by the intensive care team and how you will be seen as equals. You'll get crucial behind the scenes insight so that you know and understand what's really happening in intensive care and how you need to manage doctors and nurses in intensive care, and it's not what you think. Thank you for tuning into this week's Your Questions Answered, and I'll see you again in another update next week. Make sure you also check out our blog section for more tips and strategies, or send me an email to support@intensivecarehotline.com with your questions. Or you can call us. Find phone numbers on our contacts tab. Also check out our product section where you get more ebooks, videos and audio recordings, and where you can also get one-on-one consulting with me via Skype or over the phone by clicking on the products tab. This is Patrick Hutzel from intensivecarehotline.com, and I'll see you again next week in another update.